Welcome back to the Historical Movies Podcast, the podcast all about historically inspired movies. And in today's episode, for Spain, it's El Cid. I'm Ross Evans, I'm an editor, and I'm joined by my brother Bryce, Professor of Modern History at Liverpool Hope University and historical scriptwriter. Bryce, hola.
Hola, ¿qué tal?
Muy bien. That's the limit of my Spanish. Right, so El Cid, let's dive straight into this one. I want to start by talking about the ending. I think the ending's a good place to start with this movie. What the hell is the ending of this movie about? He's dead, isn't he? He is dead when he's strapped to the horse using a metal cast, and then he rides forward into what can only be described as the Black Hordes, as like a sort of divine angel, and he rides out of this beautiful vista we have in a Spanish castle and rides sort of very slowly towards these Black Hordes who part like the Red Sea, blinded by this angelic light coming from the dead El Cid on his steed. And then the evil antagonist of this movie, Ben Yusuf, who seems to be like an evil Bond villain for most of this movie, but right at the end is completely useless, falls off his horse, and then is trampled to death. And then we have this loud organ music, and thus the Cid rode out of the gates of history into legend. And then we have this scene of the horse riding along the beach into the sunset. And that's the ending of this movie. And I think that basically perfectly encapsulates El Cid for me. A grand spectacle, an absolutely wonderful grand spectacle from 1961, this movie. What did you make of it? What do you make of the ending, I should say? What did you make of the ending?
Well, the last scene encapsulates how, I would say how, for better and worse, this movie is the epitome of Hollywood golden age, in that it's overblown, it's overcooked, it's, some might say, obese in its epicness. Because, as you said, the last scene where he rides into heaven on his white charger as the Muslims scatter,
yes,
is indicative of that. You know, it's a big old epic of the Hollywood golden age. It lays it on thick. In, you know, one of the first scenes, Charlton Heston, El Cid, he is like Christ, isn't he? He bears a cross on his back from a ruined church.
That's the first scene. The first time we see him, he literally takes up the cross.
Yep. It's got Sophia Loren, one of the, if I may say so, hopefully I don't get cancelled, one of the most beautiful women of all time. And one of the few remaining still living Hollywood golden agers. It is indicative of that era. It's so epic, there's an intermission halfway through.
Yeah, and there's an overture at the beginning.
Yes.
And this wonderful voice of God narration that you used to get from these fabulous old 60s movies, explaining the scene. So let's get into, maybe we should start then with the history, because basically in this movie, El Cid is this unbelievably this paragon of chivalry and honor. He's such a nice guy in this movie. He's letting people go left, right, and center. He doesn't want to be king. He just wants to do it for his country. He's a true patriot. And how does that really, as the historian Bryce, how does that sit with the history of the real El Cid, who in the late 11th century was basically gallivanting around the bottom of Spain, wasn't he? Working both for the Christian kingdoms and later the Moorish caliphates and so on. Very, very complicated history, I found. I couldn't keep up with the amount of intrigue in this man's life. He's switching sides. I think he's exiled twice, isn't he, in his life? So is he basically just like the real El Cid? Is he basically just the ruthless mercenary? Or is that unfair? Is he a chivalrous knight, or is he just a completely ruthless mercenary who work for anyone if the price is right? Or is he somewhere in between?
Very good question. Well, like a lot of people from that medieval period, there was, you know, a later hagiography constructed around him, a cult, perhaps you could say, by largely ecclesiastical authors in the 13th century. The difficulty with this movie coming out in 61, it's obviously during the era as well of Franco and his vision of Spain, Christian Spain, of course. So there's a lot to unpick there. You know, was this, as is represented in part, I think, in this movie, a fight for Christian civilization, the clash of civilizations, if you like, which we're very familiar with in today's world, of course. What was he actually, to answer your question? Well, he was a warlord. This was a world of competing fiefdoms. It's not too dissimilar to perhaps practice bad history to our Braveheart era, the actual William Wallace. You're not talking about entirely unified states here. You're talking about coexistence with the Muslims when it suited. Now, El Cid himself expelled, exiled by King Alfonso. El Cid, the virtuous hero in this movie, well, in the real history, he was guilty of burning people alive on occasion. He didn't die heroically, he died of natural causes. So, if we're to get into the pedantry, there's a lot of issues here. I think, to probably try and drill down into your question though, Ross, the historical advisor to this movie was a guy called Ramon Menendez Pidal, a sort of scholar hagiographer of El Cid who lived till he was about 100. Quite really famous in Spain, Menendez Pidal, like a sort of famous historian, public intellectual. Died, I think, aged 99 in the final years of Franco's dictatorship. He would be very much... now, important to say, Menendez Pidal was not a Francoist per se, but his view of El Cid would have neatly dovetailed with that notion that we have here in the movie, at least in several shades, of medieval Castile's God-given destiny to unite Spain. And Menendez Pidal would very much have disputed the idea that El Cid was a mercenary. The current historiography, current scholars, people like Richard Fletcher, Nora Berend, very much apply that term. He was a mercenary. The coherence of the unified Christian Reconquista has been completely overblown. This clash of civilizations thing's totally overblown. It's basically exchange, warfare, give and take, assimilation. There's a lot more shades of grey rather than just the sort of the white Christian fight against the as you say, the sort of the black Arab hordes. He's a mercenary according to contemporary historiography. According to the legend, he's not. He's a great national symbol.
Yeah, and that legend comes from the Song of My Cid, composed sometime after 1140. I've got written down here. So it's basically a heroic poem. Is that right? About his life and what he achieved, and that in a large part, I suppose, in some ways, maybe it's a bit like analogous to King Arthur or something in the UK, where it's well, we're not even sure King Arthur was a real person, but there's later works that come out about how valiant and how noble he was. But it kind of obfuscates maybe some of the history. When I was looking at the history of El Cid, my God, I could not get my head around his life. It's so confusing that this whole, what is now Spain and Portugal is this very fluid map of little fiefdoms, little kingdoms. There's a kingdom over here, there's a kingdom over there. There's 4 or 5 different competing kings and warlords. That the movie we do get some idea of that, that he's exiled and he changed sides, and the political intrigue, there's an awful lot of that. But then at the same time, because we've basically got to have, as we've discussed a billion times on this podcast, because El Cid has got to be the hero, we've got to have an oversimplified baddie. And that comes in the Ben Youssef character, who... Basically, the idea is he gets all of his big bad bastards together and says, right, lads, we're going across the Mediterranean and we're going to take over Spain. And it's way more complicated than that, isn't it?
Well, I think this is the problem because, of course, this film is a product of Franco's Spain, okay? And, any, I would say, right-thinking person, certainly, you've got to criticize Franco's Spain because, the legitimate Republican government is overthrown. In the late 30s with the Spanish Civil War, etc., etc. However, being a critic of Franco, don't get me wrong, it has been criticised by sort of a lot of anti-Francoists as sort of Franco-era propaganda, which of course it is, in part. On the other hand, I think, having watched this again, for its time, it does, especially at the start, strike almost a sort of anachronistic note of inclusivity. You've got the radical Islamists here, who are criticizing the Moors in Spain for becoming effeminate with their poets and scientists. It's at least...
That scene is ridiculous. We'll come on to that later, listeners. That scene, I want to pick apart.
It's at least doffing its cap to the fact that the Moors did bring great civilizational... that Arab Spain was, it gave us the numbers, introduced the number system to Europe. Zeros and ones rather than Roman numerals.
Astronomy and mathematics.
Which of course, coming from India and Persia, it's a lot easier to do maths and computer science if you're not doing it in Roman numerals. And to hear some of the, not misplaced criticism of this from anti-Franco is completely understandable. But it's not as if this replicates the kind of view you get in the south of Spain amongst some sort of right-wing Christian nationalist Francoist types, which is that we drove the Moors out, and it's actually giving the Moors their due. I'm not saying it constructs a sort of liberal El Cid, but at the start, he lets the Moors live. Just to quote, "Suddenly I thought, why are we killing each other?" It's almost Paul McCartney. Hey, come on, guys, let's all get along.
Hey, guys, come on,
let's all get along.
Yeah, let's write a song.
But in some ways, then later on, the ending, like you said, is sort of conforming to that sort of,
unbelievably
crusading.
Overblown, isn't it?
In some ways, I thought the film mirrors Charlton Heston's personal journey from liberal civil rightsists to right-wing NRA. You reprised that rifle from my cold dead hands.
Yeah, I read that he wanted to help the campaign of JFK while this was being filmed and couldn't do it because he was filming. But that was his plan. So he originally started out as a Democrat and ended up as a Republican, quite a hardcore Republican. So another inaccuracy I noticed. I wanted to get your opinion on this. El Cid in this is very chivalrous. We were talking about knights in armor. We've even got jousting and so on. And there's all these kind of these heraldic chivalry ideas. But aren't we a little bit too early for that? I thought that came in maybe 50, 100 years later, and that's sort of the high Middle Ages when that really gets going. Aren't we a little bit early for jousting and a little bit early for that kind of chivalry stuff in this movie?
Yeah, yes, I think we are historically. Also, I find artistically, a lot of the, I was actually thinking, movie violence has come a long way. It's incredible how acceptable these days in movies, historical movies of today, on-screen violence is just become sort of out of control and acceptable. To a way greater extent than on-screen sex has, for example. And there's way too much of it now. On the other hand, you look at the on-screen violence of this. As I say, it's a bloated movie. There's way too many extras standing around bored in uniforms. When they have sword fights, it's this sort of chivalric, Laurence Olivier, stage-esque, campy Shakespearean, "On guard, you blackguard, and take that, and that, and another, you ruffian."
It's brilliantly campy. It's fantastically camp in some places. This movie, isn't it?
Yeah. And having watched,
there's too much makeup. The sets look like they're going to fall over. It's too. Everything's too colourful. It's great.
Well, having what we watched fairly recently, the Vikings similar era movie. I actually, I think on-screen violence is way overblown now. But my goodness, it's come a long way since these days when it's entirely unconvincing and campy. Like I say, it's very much take that and that. It really, some of the sword fight scenes are, as you say, they're harking to that era of, that never really existed of high chivalry, and they haven't aged well. Yeah,
there's basically a bit of the first sword fight that goes on for bloody ages when he's fighting the king's champion, who's a fat old man. There's a bit where he's sort of very slowly walking backwards, and Charlton Heston is thrashing his sword against this, making sure that he's hitting the sword right in the middle of the sword, not trying to stab him at the side or whatever. That's that kind of. We've talked on this podcast about 60s movies. I love the fact that they're completely overblown. This movie had 7,000 extras, 10,000 costumes, 35 ships. I don't know where the ships are. I know they've got those black weird black ships at the end on the beach, 50 siege engines. Franco gave 3,000 soldiers over to this movie, 1,100 mounted police with their horses to create these armies. And it looks incredible. Obviously not one shot of CGI. And these movies, it's obvious to say they do not make them like this anymore, but it's something to behold this movie. I do think it's too long, really. It's like 3 hours, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's for my modern eyes, it's a little bit, you could cut off one or two storylines maybe.
It's bloated. That's the best term I could have for it. It's bloated. It is problematic that, I've just said that, some of the anti-Franco criticism doesn't quite stand up, but it is, of course, problematic that the Franco regime is so invested in this. And I've noticed how the historical advisor is not a Francoist per se, but you've a dovetailing of historical visions there. Of course, that's problematic. It is like an obese, sweaty American trying to squeeze into an economy class airplane seat. This film constantly struggles under its own weight. It's very bloated. There's way too many extras, as you've just illustrated there. Lots of men just standing around in uniform doing nothing. So many horses. Yeah, so many characters as well. And there's even that scene where they're introducing the court. So the king comes in. I mean, first of all, I suppose what's amazing about this is that they have massively simplified the complex history, because the intrigue, like King Alfonso killing his brother King Sancho and all this kind of stuff is very complicated. But there's that scene in the courtroom where we have the old king, and then he introduces, and then it's the Prince Sancho, and then Prince Alfonso, and the princess whose name escapes me. Yeah. And I'm thinking at this point, Jesus, how many characters are in this movie? There's way too much of that.
Yeah. I mean, we'll come on to this later. They did make there's a Spanish series, isn't there? There's a 10-episode series, like 10 hours series that was made a few years ago about El Cid. And I'm thinking halfway through this movie, this should be a Netflix series. I usually think like, okay, films are the best medium because you have to cut everything down to the smallest amount, that you get the absolute best cuts, the best stuff makes it into a movie. But this maybe actually is deserving of a proper a modern proper remake as a Netflix series. We have to come on to the fact that Charlton Heston and Sophia Loren did not get on during the making of this movie. Did you read about this, Bryce? Hated each other, in fact.
Really? No, go on, tell me more.
Yeah. Well, Heston hated the fact that he ages quite considerably in this movie. I love it when he comes in the door with a full beard, whilst Loren stayed exactly the same. Apparently, did you hear this as well, that Loren was rumoured to have been paid $1 million to do this movie for 10 weeks' work?
Worth every penny. She's an icon. She's an icon.
Irrespective, more than Charlton Heston, who's just come off the back of Ben-Hur, where he won an Oscar, and The Ten Commandments. And Sophia Loren is upstaging him, getting paid more. He was also annoyed that she kept turning up late, and had a personal hairdresser at $200 a week. And it got to the point where he demanded for close-up shots of him, close-up shots of her. He demanded to have a body double stand in for him, and refused to look at Sophia Loren when they were filming the love scenes, basically. And even said at the scene at the end on the deathbed that he wasn't looking at Sophia Loren, he was looking into the future.
My verdict as a Sophia Loren fan is big baby. Charlton Heston's big baby. A big whining American baby. Welcome to
Trying
Europe.
To fit into an economy seat.
Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. So I just want to get on to this idea of the Reconquista then, Bryce, because I was a bit confused about that, because I know the Reconquista apparently ends at around 1490 odd, isn't it? By the time that Columbus is sent off to quote unquote discover the new world. I didn't realize it went on for this whole period.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned before, the scholars today, the leading scholars today, I mentioned a couple earlier, would completely question the coherence of any kind of unified Christian Reconquista. I suppose, on the other hand, you can't get around the fact that, coming towards the 1490s, as you say, with the alliance of Aragon and Castile, you do have the formal expulsion of the Moors, and as well, which of course mentioned formal expulsion of the Jews. So Spain does emerge into its golden age as a very Christian, a very Catholic nation. So if your notion of reconquest and unity and rebirth is essentially Catholic, well, there's this solid historical ground for that. But I think the historiography today has punched several holes into this, kind of hagiographical notion of El Cid as forging this unity, because in this era it's really too early, in terms of formation of nation states. You can see why the Francoist project is very enamored with this, because it serves them a great propagandaic value. But yes, it is a little anachronistic to talk of a unified Spanish nation state at this stage. As we've said, it's more competing fiefdoms and mercenaries for hire, like our man El Cid.
Well, it's very interesting what you said about this film does actually, in some part, give the Moors or the Almoravid Empire its dues in some respect. There's that scene, that great scene where the Christian army and the Moorish army have a big hug in the river. And you talked about the fact of the scene at the beginning, talking about he's talking about poetry and scientists and stuff like that. So it's not just as perhaps ridiculously Christian one-sided that the ending gives you that impression a little bit. That's what I found with the ending. Anyway, shall we move on to our list of questions that we ask Bryce of every movie?
Before we do so, would you mind if we talked about the two leading characters in this movie, the two great Hollywood golden era leading lights of Heston and Loren, but our third leading man is himself from the Italian Job.
Raf Valone. Yes, I was going to come on to the wonderful who plays Count Ordonez in this movie. Yes, a big hero of mine, Raf Valone, who plays the mafia mastermind in the Italian Job. England, gentlemen, is that way. Good morning, as he says in that movie.
Will you permit me? Yeah, going back to that scene in the Italian... Now, again, for those listeners who don't know the Italian Job, I'm sure there's not many, but,
Watch it, it's brilliant.
60s crime caper where a load of lovable Cockney rogues are working for criminal mastermind Mr. Bridger, Noel Coward.
Yes.
And they're carrying out a gold bullion theft in Turin in Italy. And the scene you're quoting there is where the mafia... embodied by your man, what's his name? Sorry,
Raf Valone.
Raf Valone.
Yeah.
Confront Michael Caine.
Yes.
As the leader of the Cockney criminal lovable rogues, and I've just always thought. I'm sorry to segue into the Italian Job here, but talking about 60s movies, this guy, it's legitimate because your man is in this movie in a huge way.
And this is his first English speaking part as well, so it was significant. Yeah.
I've often thought that he deserves to be a plaintiff at the International Criminal Court. Do you know why?
Why?
Because in that scene, and I'm sorry to segue into the Italian Job here, listeners, but he confronts Michael Caine, or rather the mafia confront the British gangsters on a hilltop. Before, as I recall, the mafia launch Michael Caine's sports car off a mountainside.
Yes, 3 fast cars. Yep.
Yeah. I have to say, quite mild compared to some of the excesses of the mafia I've seen on screen. After he does that, Michael Caine replies by threatening this actor playing the mafia.
Raf Valone. Yep. You'll learn his name eventually.
Raf Valone. Yeah. by saying, and I quote, and I can't do it right. You probably do it better than Michael Caine. "You'll be making a grave error if you kill us." "There are 250,000 Italians in Britain, and they'll be made to suffer. Every restaurant, cafe, ice cream parlour, gambling den and nightclub in London, Liverpool and Glasgow will be smashed. Mr. Bridger will drive them into the sea."
Yeah.
He's effectively threatening ethnic cleansing.
Yes, of Italians in Britain.
He's effectively threatening genocide.
Yes.
Michael Caine, lovable Michael Caine.
He's bluffing though, Bryce.
He's threatening Raf Valone with genocide.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that's true. Yeah. Maybe we should segue back to the historical movies podcast. Maybe we do the '60s movies podcast. The other amazing thing about Raf Valone is that he was he was a partisan against Mussolini during the Second World War, and then was a footballer. Did you know that? He fought against the fascists, and later was a footballer, and he won Serie A. The top league in Italy with forgotten, I think it's Torino or something, but he became a footballer and then became an actor.
And after all that, Michael Caine threatened him with ethnic cleansing.
Yeah, so he's a legend. He's one of my favourite
Also
actors.
in this movie, he's sporting the 50s, 60s beatnik style bomb chin.
Yes.
Well, not bomb chin, bomb hair chin, chinny low birdie chin,
Chin curtain.
Yeah. Colloquially known, I believe, as the chin fanny.
He is, yeah. He is wonderful in this movie. He doesn't get enough screen time for me, and it's another thing. Yeah. There's a little too many characters, a few too many characters in this. Anyway, we'll come on to that in a second. We'll start with our questions, and of course, we'll start with trivial trivia. Bryce, this week, Sophia Loren was once late to set because her costume was making a strange clanking noise. In the style of El Cid, time for an intermission. It's Ross here. Thanks very much for listening on YouTube. Don't forget to check out all of our other episodes, and we'd love to hear from you, so leave us a comment. And any sharing or liking or subscribing you can do would really help the podcast. So thanks a lot. I've also got a new section for you, Bryce, as well, called Aged Badly. Because every time we talk about these films, there's often an age discrepancy. Well, it's to do with like how old the characters are supposed to be, and it's usually to do with the fact that the lead character is a lot older than his historical counterpart was at the time. So in this movie, Sir Michael Hordern, who plays Charlton Heston's father, is only 12 years older than Charlton Heston. But then I was thinking, well, it is the medieval period, and it's probably biologically doable, as we've mentioned before in this podcast, probably biologically doable that he could have been his dad, although he was only 12 years older for the medieval period. So maybe it's not even that inaccurate. So
yeah, I mean, didn't strike me as a huge inaccuracy. Yeah, go on.
That brings me on then, Bryce, to your favourite character or performance. Is it the wonderful Raf Valone as Count Ordonez?
No, it's Sophia Loren and
the $1 million.
From what you just said there about Heston coming over here to Europe, throwing his toys out the pram, you're in front of real quality here. You're in front of Sophia Loren, possibly the most beautiful woman of all time. Who I think in this movie, if you take this as a bloated Hollywood golden age piece, she really gives it large, the passionate Latin lady vibes. Yeah. Which Heston clearly couldn't cope with. Lines such as, "If I cannot be with you, I will kill myself."
So Charlton Heston's not doing it for you in this movie, because he is. I mean, in Ben-Hur, Ten Commandments, he's this wonderful. Apparently, they didn't ever think of any other actor for this part. It was written especially for him as the leading man to be.
I can see why, but when you look at the pouting, passionate Latin brilliance of Sophia Loren, I can see why there was a clash there. She's if you take this on the terms of something which is grossly camp and overblown in every regard, then she plays it beautifully. Well,
I thank you for bringing on the grossly overblown campness in this, because my favourite performance in this film is the wonderful Frank Thring, who played in the Vikings King Aela.
Easy for you to say.
Who played in the last movie we did, the Vikings. He's in that movie as well as the sort of completely overblown "bring me his head" King Aela. And in this movie he's blackface, unfortunately, but he's playing one of the Muslim underlords, or whatever you call them. And in one of my favourite scenes, when Ben Youssef charges into Valencia to sort of kick him up the arse for not doing enough, he's sitting there belly out, eating like a banquet meal, and then later he's doing the same thing as the entire city is starving. You see all these shots of all the people like desperately hungry, and he's sitting on his ass, lying in fact, on his side, eating grapes, and he's again
Well,
wonderfully camp, wonderfully overblown, and he ends by getting thrown off a wall, and it's clearly a dummy. And I just love it. I absolutely love his acting.
You could say that is a typically Orientalist and thereby racist, inherently racist depiction. Or you could say, to use contemporary parlance, he's living his best life.
What was your favourite scene then, Bryce? There's a few. This movie, I think it's a bit long. I think it's good fun. You know, you sit down and you can come back to this movie, and because it's so complicated, you can watch it several times. I think I've watched it twice now, and I thought, I forgot that bit, and then we're off to he does this. He's got to fight the King's Champion, and he's got to we've got to get to this certain stage before he can take Valencia. My favourite scene is the jousting scene, although I think it is too early for jousting historically. I actually really enjoyed the jousting scene in this. What about you? What's your favourite scene?
You started this off with the deathbed scene. It took about too long. I mean, the lingering, sweaty deathbed scene is so long. I think it was I might be getting this wrong as I paraphrase. Wasn't it Oscar Wilde on his deathbed who said, "Either I go or that wallpaper does"? And you can say the same of Heston here, dying a very
slow death,
lingering death.
Yes.
Against the ridiculous gilt-edged purple drapes.
Well, he is basically Christ in this movie, isn't he? As testified by the first time we see him, and he's literally carrying the cross. So it's like the suffering, isn't that like the passion? Then at the end,
yes, of course, which wouldn't have been lost, of course, on audiences, and again dovetailed with the sort of Francoist, Catholic Spain message there. For me, it's the in keeping with the just obscene bloatedness of this movie, the melodrama, the way too many extras, the way too many horses.
Yeah.
Just imagine the boredom on set. I mean, it's just so boring. But I think for me, it's the big siege scene at the end. Really is probably the.
It is magnificent, isn't it?
The
beautiful
scene.
Setting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the best scene for me.
One of my favourite scenes is when basically Sophia Loren is happy for one evening in this film. Poor woman, poor character. But one of my favourite scenes is when he's been chucked into exile, El Cid, and they're in the stable and they've finally had a passionate night and everything. And then he says the immortal line, "If all men knew banishment could be like this, we'd have a world full of exiles." And then they go out the door, and then there's an entire fucking army outside that they haven't realised that's turned up and they haven't heard. It's amazing. And I'm thinking, well, and then he says, then he gets into this kind of fervour and he says, that's when he says the line I said at the beginning, "For Spain." And I'm thinking, that, Sid, stay in the barn with Sophia Loren. How important is it? And at the end, just get the arrow taken out.
But he as I said before, in real life he just dies of natural causes. There's no heroic death.
And then I have to come back, Bryce, to the intro scene, which is absolutely... This movie comes out of the gates firing on all cylinders. It's ridiculous. His meeting of the black-faced bad bastards, the insane level of eyeliner he's wearing, and then he's going he says at one point, "Where are your warriors? You have become women." And then he goes, "Kill! Burn!" It's completely over the top. It's brilliant. And then they talk about, there's that shrieking the name of Allah and so on. And it's just, it's bananas. Absolutely bananas. It's basically, he's the Hood from Thunderbirds. He's a Bond villain in this movie. And
he's the image of a Muslim person that most contemporary right-wing European parties would subscribe to.
Yeah, which does the real character a great disservice, doesn't it? Because Yusuf Ibn Tashfin, I've got, he's the guy it's based on, ruler of the Almoravid dynasty, who did bring together all these Berber tribes and then conquer part of southern Spain. But he retook Valencia at 96 years old. That's older than Sophia Loren is. I didn't know that. That's incredible.
She's 99 now, isn't she?
199 or something, yeah. Bryce, I have to ask you...
No, she's not... Oh, yeah, she's 90, isn't she?
She's 90, yeah. I thought she was dead. to be honest. At time of recording, she's still alive, and I hope she still is. Bryce, what part would Mel Gibson have played? I think we know the answer to that, don't we? To that
the
question.
Titular role.
It has to be, doesn't it?
It's always the answer to that question.
Because this movie has got those anachronistic concepts that Mel likes to add into his movies. You know, the fact that he's banging on about freedom and Braveheart, and you think, it's the feudal period, mate. What are you talking about? And
well,
in
I
this
don't
movie...
think... Mel's not going to have any problems in picking to pieces the incoherence of the Christian Reconquista, is he?
No, but there is a bit in this movie where El Cid, you know, gives he says, we bring you freedom, doesn't he, to the Valencians? He gives them bread and so on, and it's completely overblown. And I thought it would be perfect. It would be a perfect Mel Gibson film if they'd remade this 20 years ago.
Well, I actually thought, you know, and I've said this before, we have a bit of fun with Mel, but in a way, this film illustrates how far historical epics have come. Because actually, the historical epic of the Mel Gibson stable, for all its faults, is way better than this kind of bloated nonsense, I have to say. Yeah,
it's a different era, isn't it? You know, this is sword and sandals kind of stuff, and you know, there's a reason why these movies died out eventually, and it's because they just were so inflexible with how they could portray historical epics. You're having to plow in $9 million in 1961, thousands of extras and so on. Who should do the DVD commentary, Bryce? I've got Youssef Ibn Tashfin, the guy that Ben Youssef is because they do him such a disservice, basically, in this movie.
I'd like to hear Franco, deceased dictator of Spain, telling, you know, because there's a serious point. It's, you know, Franco moves, you know, slowly back into the Western fold post World War II, obviously in the context of the Cold War, and this kind of thing is very convenient for him. And I'd be interested to hear, although I think I know the answer, you know, how this, you know, dovetailed with his kind of personal mission.
I read that he wanted to be,
isn't it? This film,
he wanted to be associated, like El Cid was with driving the Muslims out of Spain. That he wanted to be associated with driving, you know, communism out of Spain.
He liked to align himself with many people, better qualified people than I have written on this. You know, in terms of, if you go to his monument, the Valle de los Caídos, right next to El Escorial, the palace of Philip II. You know, he liked to associate with Spain's great rulers of the past, and you know, bastardize that history. Mm-hmm. So I'd be interested, you know, to hear the squeaky-voiced Galician himself give an account here.
Yeah. Best companion film. I've mentioned that there's a Spanish TV series which I think was cancelled after 2 series. There's 10 episodes. They probably could have made about 50. But that's what I've got. Have you got anything?
I haven't. You know, I think this is a unique piece, really, and you know, but it operates at the interesting. You mentioned that, you know, the Spanish television stuff. It operates at the level of telenovela, doesn't it? It's very it's highly melodramatic.
Yeah.
Nonsense in large part.
Yeah. Well, the director of this movie, Anthony Mann, also did The Fall of the Roman Empire 3 years later with Sophia Loren again, who was definitely paid $1 million for that movie. And he also did The Heroes of the Telemark. You know, that Second World War commando movie with your favourite bum-chinned Kirk Douglas in the lead role. So maybe we'll come back to Anthony Mann's historical films later in a future episode. What thing have you got for our Hall of Fame, Bryce? What prop or historical artifact would we put in a museum? My one, shall I tell you mine?
Yeah, go on. The
device used to bolt him to his horse at the end, the dead El Cid.
I was going to say the low hairy fanny chin
from Raf Valone.
What's his name? Ravanelli?
His name is Raf Valone. Right, so
Ravanelli's fanny chin.
Right, so what would happen in the sequel if there was one?
Franco would revive the memory of this man and carry out a horrific Reconquista of his own and on his own people with horrifying consequences.
So nothing
600
good.
years later.
Nothing good. No. I've got written down the Almoravid Empire, you know, the Moorish Empire, recaptured Valencia, I think only 2 or 3 years later, didn't they? And then it wasn't until was it Granada, the last place, the last principality that fell in 300, 400 years' time. So then basically we've got a lot more of this stuff in a sequel. A hell of a lot more of this kind of history of warring little fiefdoms and kingdoms, and then later Spain becomes unified and so on.
Goody gumdrops. Yeah.
Yeah, great. I think Charlton Heston's unavailable. Pence Corner from moviemistakes.com, Bryce. As El Cid enters Valencia, there's a man wearing a flat cap that you can see. Yeah. Have you got anything for Sude's Corner? I did read an article in The Guardian, which is usually where we go with these things, but it wasn't a review. No, it wasn't a review.
What was it?
Oh, it was just talking about the history. It was saying that the film, as a historical epic, is like grade A, but the history is like grade E or something, because it doesn't do a great job of explaining the how complicated the history is. But I did find that Martin Scorsese, who describes this movie as one of the greatest epic films ever made, was behind the 1993 digital and colour restoration. He supervised that, and he added 16 minutes to this movie, bringing the total to 188
Jesus
minutes. And I was thinking, you didn't need to do that. That was not necessary.
It sort of surprises me on one level and then doesn't surprise me on another level. Knowing Scorsese's, how can I put this, kind of fondness again for the cat, I suppose, a sort of Latin Catholicized version of history, perhaps. Yeah. Not trying to tar him with any kind of brush there. Doesn't surprise me on that level. On another level, it does surprise me because I don't really think this is I just don't think, like I said, this is such a bloated movie. It's sort of, that's kind of incongruous with a lot of his sort of generally really good output. Okay.
Well, this brings us on then to the final question, which is what we give this out of 10. And I don't agree with Martin Scorsese. I don't think this is one of the greatest epic films ever made. People listening will think, who cares? But I think, as you said, I just think it's too long, this movie. I think it's not focused enough. But having said that, the production values, the campness, the fact that it's a 60s movie, I love films that begin with a voice of God narration, and this film ends with it. And I love those panning, beautiful shots, the fact that they were shooting like 1 million feet of celluloid film. I absolutely love that about this movie. And I love the campness of it. I love the sets that you get. I love the fact that it's too colourful. 10,000 costumes. Can you imagine? So that's what I did like. And some of the performances are so camp. It's just, that was great fun. I enjoyed watching it for 3 hours, but I'm giving it as a movie, I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. What about you?
Okay, I'd probably give it a 4 out of 10.
Oh,
I think. It's just too much. It just lays it on far too thick.
The baddies are too bad and the goodies are too good, you mean?
Yeah. Look, as you're right, it's of its time.
Well, I did watch this when I was ill, and I watched it all the way through for 3 hours. But the first time I watched it like in half an hour chunks, and I actually found that quite a good way to watch it, because it works quite nicely as a little a series, a little half an hour chunk series. If you sit down and think, fucking hell, this movie goes on for 3 hours, then it can be a little challenging to get through. But
it's probably subject matter which is more becoming of a Netflix series than a movie, than a standalone movie.
Yeah. So. Yeah, brilliant. So, well, if you're watching this on YouTube, let us know in the comment section what you think of this movie. Or get in contact with us if you're listening to the podcast on other platforms. Get in contact with us. The link to the email address, which I keep forgetting, is in the description of this episode. So we'd love to hear from you if you've got any opinions on this movie. So that was El Cid. Bryce, thanks very much for joining me. And we'll see you next time on the Historical Movies Podcast. That's it for this episode of the Historical Movies Podcast. Don't forget to leave us a review on your chosen podcast platform. Spotify and Apple Podcasts make a huge difference to the algorithm. And if you're on YouTube, don't forget to leave a comment or a like or subscribe. Thanks very much for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.